Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to dig in?
Always. What are we tackling today?
Well, today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's honestly sparked endless debate.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Female sexual motivation.
Right. You got it. It feels like everyone's got an opinion
They do.
or a theory,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and we've got a ton of listener material to get through today.
Excellent.
We've got everything from a men's dating coach's take on it
Interesting.
to research on how sex changes for women as they get older.
Should be fascinating to unpack all of that.
Yeah. Speaking of unpacking, should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay. I got to ask this right out of the gate. How much truth is there to that whole women only want sex if it comes with a ring thing?
You know, that's a stereotype that just won't quit. Right. But is there any truth to it?
Honestly, not really.
Really?
It's way more complex than that.
Okay, so if it's not about snagging a spouse, what does the research actually say? What actually motivates women to have sex?
Well, one study you sent over found that the top reasons were actually pretty straightforward. Pleasure, love, and commitment.
Okay, so it really is a mix of things.
Exactly. It's not just one thing, it's the combination.
Right, because we're complex beings, right?
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting. Another article you sent, it was about a book on female sexuality, mentioned things like stress relief and feeling more attractive as motivations.
Oh, wow. So it can be about so many different needs and desires.
Exactly. And even improving sleep. I mean, who hasn't used sex as an excuse to cuddle up?
Huh, that's true. So much for those simplistic his and hers ideas about sex.
Right. It's definitely more nuanced than that.
Definitely. Now, what about that dating coach you mentioned? What was his take?
He argued that women might use intimacy as a way to, like, strengthen their relationship. Like diffuse arguments or even avoid potential conflicts.
So it can be a way to create more harmony in a relationship. That's actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And it shows how deeply connected sex and relationships can be.
That makes a lot of sense. What about that idea that women only have casual sex if there's a chance it could lead to something more serious?
It's funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
The research actually suggests that women are more likely to engage in casual sex with someone they could see themselves dating anyway.
Oh, really? So they're not necessarily looking for a relationship, but they're open to the possibility.
Perfect.
So it's more about being attracted to the person and seeing where things go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It challenges that whole notion that women need a relationship to justify casual intimacy.
It's about trusting their instincts and choosing partners they're genuinely interested in.
Yes.
Speaking of instincts, I've always wondered about that whole sex as a bargaining chip idea. Have you come across that in your research?
It definitely comes up, yeah.
And what's the verdict?
Well, it's complicated. Remember that dating coach?
Yeah.
He pointed out that women might use intimacy to, smooth over relationship tensions, like
Yeah.
meeting their partner's needs to kind of keep the peace.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily about manipulation, more like a way to keep things harmonious?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
And for some women, it might be about feeling more secure in the relationship, especially if physical touch is a big part of how they feel loved. But let's be real.
Yeah,
Using sex as a bargaining chip, it can get messy.
for sure. Which brings us to, I think, one of the biggest takeaways here.
What's that?
We got to talk to each other. Open and honest communication is key, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something as personal as sex. Assumptions, stereotypes, they just won't cut it.
Couldn't agree more. Now, we've been talking about women as if they're all the same, but we go through so many changes over time.
Absolutely. Life happens, right?
And our relationships with sex, they change right along with us.
100%. And that actually leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive.
So last time we were talking about how women's relationship with sex can change over time.
And we're talking like big changes, right?
Right. Like life stages and hormones and all that.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of this conversation.
It feels like a whole other deep dive, honestly.
It kind of is, but it's all connected, right?
Definitely. So where do we even start? I mean, we were talking about hormones before the break.
Right. Menopause, it's
Yep.
a big one.
It sure is. It's like our bodies go rogue or something.
It can feel that way.
Yeah.
But the thing is, a lot of those changes are totally treatable.
Okay, but first, tell me what kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, for one thing, estrogen levels can drop,
Okay.
and that can lead to vaginal dryness.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and the vaginal tissues can thin out too.
Ouch. That honestly doesn't sound fun at all.
It's not. And it can make sex painful.
And if sex is painful, you're definitely not going to want to do it.
Exactly.
So it's not just in our heads, it's a real physical thing.
100%.
Wow. Okay. So what can you do about it?
Well, there are a few options. One thing is hormone replacement therapy, or HRT.
HRT. Okay.
Yep. And there are also vaginal estrogen creams and even lubricants.
Okay, so like different ways to kind of address the issue.
Exactly.
Got it. So it
Yeah.
sounds like communication is key here too.
Communication is always key. Talking to your partner about these changes is so important.
I bet. So you're not suffering in silence.
Right. Because you're in this together.
Now, all this talk about hormones and physical stuff, it's a good reminder that our minds play a huge role in desire too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, like all that societal baggage we carry around.
Exactly. We're not just physical beings. We're emotional and psychological beings too, right?
Right. And all of that affects how we experience desire.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's this concept called sexual concordance.
By show what now?
Sexual concordance.
Hmm.
Basically, it means that a woman's physical response to sexual stimuli
Yeah.
might not always match up with how turned on she actually feels.
Whoa, wait, really? Like her body's saying one thing, but her mind's saying something totally different.
Exactly. And it's something we see in women a lot more than men.
That's wild. Why is that?
Well, it's complicated,
Mm.
but a lot of it comes down to societal expectations and past experiences.
Ah, here comes that baggage again.
Right. Think about it. We tell women to be demure and not too sexual,
Yeah.
but then we've got all these images in the media of what a sexy woman should look and act like.
It's totally a mixed message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No wonder some women feel disconnected from their own bodies and desires.
Okay, but how do we break free from those messages? How do we reclaim our sexuality?
That is the million-dollar question, my friend. It's a journey, not a quick fix.
So where do we start?
Therapy can be really helpful for unpacking all of that.
Makes sense. Anything else?
It's also about exploring what you like and what feels good.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, learning to communicate that to your partner.
Communication is huge.
It's everything,
You know, it's amazing how much this all comes back to communication.
right?
It's like the magic key or something.
It really is. And it makes sense when you think about it.
It does. Because we're not mind readers.
Definitely not.
And especially with something as personal as sex, you really can't just like assume you know what your partner wants.
Oh, absolutely not. That's a recipe for disaster.
Right. So how do we get better at this? At actually talking about sex?
Oh, first of all, remember that dating coach we talked about earlier?
Yeah. What about him?
He said that couples who talk about sex are more likely to have better sex.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess.
Hmm.
But how do we actually have those conversations? It can be awkward.
It can be a little awkward at first, for sure.
Yeah.
But the more you do it, the easier it gets. It's like anything else.
True dat. Practice makes perfect.
Exactly. So start small. Maybe just tell your partner one thing you liked from the last time you were together.
Interesting. So it's not always about having some big, deep conversation.
Not at all. It's the little things sometimes,
Yeah.
just those small gestures that can make a big difference.
I like it. So instead of like dropping hints or hoping they'll just magically figure it out.
Oh, yeah. Ditch the mind games. Be direct. Be honest.
Be open.
Exactly. And compassionate. Remember, this is about connecting with another person.
Yeah.
So approach these conversations with empathy and understanding.
That's good advice for honestly every part of a relationship, not just sex.
So true. It all comes back to connection.
It really does. Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We really have, from those persistent stereotypes to how women's sexuality changes over time.
And let's not forget the power of the mind.
Right. That was a big one. Understanding how societal expectations and past experiences can impact a woman's relationship with her own body, so crucial.
So important. And on that note, as we wrap things up here, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked a lot about how society shapes how women view their sexuality, but what if we could rewrite that narrative? What if we could create a culture where women felt empowered to explore and express their desires freely, without shame or judgment? Something to think about.
That's a fantastic question to leave everyone with.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Until next time.
Bye, everyone.